Well, Governor Rauner and Speaker Madigan met. They are no closer to putting a budget in place. Meanwhile, millions of people across the state are suffering from a lack of state funding. In a special report, News Channel 20's Adam Rife looks at how much damage has been done in the past 22 months and if there's any hope of reversing it.
One of the biggest challenges we face is to put the budget impasse in proper context that adequately assesses the damage being done by the devastating effects of this unprecedented 22-month-long budget crisis. As we enter this crucial final month of regularly scheduled legislative session, we want to look at the impasse with fresh eyes to re-examine who's being hurt, how it's happening, and what will keep happening if nothing is done. The day-to-day damage may seem relatively minor if you're not directly affected, but even those words themselves, budget impasse, are now just another tired euphemism for political gridlock.
If you've got a child in school here in Springfield, they're sitting next to another child whose family is struggling.
For 22 months, lawmakers have failed to agree on a fully funded spending plan. John Kelker, executive director of the United Way of Central Illinois, says the damage is not just financial.
Every day, whether you're an agency getting funding or you work at the state or your children are going to school, there's a cloud over people here in Springfield.
A partial stopgap budget provided some desperately needed funding through the end of 2016, but when it expired, nearly half of all agencies had to cut staff within 3 months, and 1 in 4 had been forced to cut programs. But even temporary funding doesn't help everyone. The Sojourn Shelter in Springfield helps roughly 6,800 people every year, providing emergency shelter, crisis management, and counseling.
Every night they go to bed and they're scared. They don't know if they're going to get hurt or they'll wake up and their mom will be dead. That's where we come in. We're giving them a safe place and helping to eliminate that fear.
Angela Bertoni says they've been forced to make difficult cuts for months now while trying desperately to maintain their services.
We're very careful with each and every dollar that we get. We're really doing good work and we manage our money really, really well.
75% of domestic violence victims are more likely to be killed if they leave an abusive relationship. These programs are critical because they save lives. Sojourn has not gotten a check since June of last year, and they're not alone. Not one single domestic violence program in the state was included in the stopgap budget, putting thousands of crime victims at risk if their local shelters can't absorb the cuts.
We have a lot of repeat clients, and so they're fearful, like, where do I go? If you guys aren't here, like, what happens to me?
For other service providers, temporary funding is just a temporary stay of execution. Getting a check here or there provides little long-term stability, something they desperately need.
So we're not always concerned, worried about if we're going to get funding, if we're not going to get funding. That is the biggest concern, not knowing what's going to happen.
Joan Queen's the executive director of Mercy Communities in Springfield, a shelter for women and children. Mercy's relying heavily on volunteers.
If we don't have it, the supportive services piece of it, you're going to have a lot of more homeless people out there because we're not going to be able to serve these people.
And sure, when you're desperate, some money is better than no money at all, like it was for the autism program, which was forced to shut its doors. As many as 50 people in Springfield alone were left without critical care services.
It's actually unethical to discontinue services without being able to refer the child for other services, and that's a real problem. The state has forced the discontinuation of services where there really isn't a replacement available.
The stopgap budget did allow TAP to reopen, but in their case and many others, severe damage is already done on several fronts.
At best, they'll regress. A lot of the development that they had improved upon while they were receiving services, without a continuation of those services, they'll go backwards.
Comptroller Susana Mendoza writes the checks.
These are real people. They have real problems. And the worst part about this is that this crisis is a man-made crisis that was entirely avoidable.
Mendoza says she's written emergency checks to save service providers from shutting down and says it's far too common.
Literally, our office is in the position to have to triage these types of situations week to week, day to day.
And usually it's not enough.
They knew when they ran this would be challenging. They need a solution. There is no statesmanship taking place in the State House.
So how long could this last?
If we don't receive our funding by the end of the fiscal year, we're going to have to be looking at some really, really, really difficult choices. If funding doesn't come in after that, then when do we shut our doors?
Now, there's so many crises, we didn't have nearly the time to give them each their due, like the Wells Center in Jacksonville, which has been providing critical drug rehabilitation services for 49 years. As we reported in the past week, the Wells Center announced they'd have to shut down unless they got emergency funding. And this wasn't an idle threat. They set a closing date, told clients they'd have to go elsewhere, and told staff they couldn't pay them. Occasionally, a long overdue check from the state arrived that helped for a few weeks, but it wasn't enough. The Wells Center is shutting down for good on Monday, the same day lawmakers returned to the State House.